The cold, sterile silence of the mansion was the first thing Julian Vance noticed. It was a silence he had curated for over a decade, a silence built of marble floors, soaring ceilings, and walls insulated by wealth. But now, with a 7-year-old girl standing in the cavernous master bedroom, the silence felt less like peace and more like a tomb. He had just finalized the adoption. The papers were signed, the judges had stamped their approval, and the perpetually overworked director of the St. Jude's Orphanage had left with a tearful, hopeful smile. Lily was officially his daughter. The thought was both terrifying and foreign. He knelt before her, holding a small, simple dress of soft blue wool. It was a world away from the threadbare gray uniform she had worn for as long as she could remember. "Let's get you into something a little more comfortable," Julian said, his voice softer than he intended. Lily nodded, her eyes wide as she took in the room. It was larger than the entire dormitory she had shared with 10 other girls. She stood perfectly still as he helped her slip the rough uniform over her head. For a moment, she stood in her thin chemise, a small, fragile figure in the vast, opulent space. As he gently guided her arms into the sleeves of the new dress, he noticed her long, dark hair was tangled. He reached out to brush a stray lock from her neck, his fingers tracing the delicate skin just below her ear. And then he saw it. He froze. His hand, which had signed billion-dollar contracts without a tremor, began to shake. The world around him seemed to dissolve. The ornate furniture, the silk curtains, the very air in his lungs, turning to static. There, on the pale, vulnerable skin of her neck, was a birthmark. It wasn't just any mark. It was a tiny, perfectly formed constellation of 3 small dots, arranged in the shape of a star. An Orion's belt, so small it could be covered by the tip of a finger. Isabella's star. The name, a ghost he had buried for 15 years, screamed through his mind. He stumbled back, knocking over a heavy silver-backed brush from the vanity. It clattered against the marble floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the dead quiet of the room. Lily flinched, her eyes filling with the familiar fear of an orphan who has just done something wrong, something that would get her sent back. She clutched the front of her new dress, her small face crumpling. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry. Please don't be mad." But Julian couldn't hear her. He couldn't see the frightened child in front of him. All he could see was that tiny star, a brand on his memory, a secret he thought had been buried with the only woman he had ever loved. He stared at the little girl, at the impossible mark on her neck, and a single, soul-shattering question took root in his heart, a question that would either destroy him or finally, after all these years, bring him home. The journey to this moment had been a slow, hesitant one, born from an emptiness Julian could no longer fill with work or wealth. His company, Vance Industries, was a titan of technology, its logo a symbol of innovation and ruthless efficiency. He had built it from nothing, fueled by a relentless drive that left little room for personal connection. His penthouse apartment overlooked the city, a glass cage from which he observed a world he owned but did not inhabit. The loneliness had become a dull ache, a constant companion in the quiet hours after the markets closed and the sycophants went home. Philanthropy was his lawyer Arthur's idea. "It's good for your public image, Julian," the older man had advised, "and God knows you've got the money." So he had agreed to fund a new wing for the perpetually struggling St. Jude's Orphanage, a place on the forgotten side of town where hope was a rationed commodity. He had expected the visit to be a brief, sterile affair. A handshake with the director, a tour of the crumbling brick building, and a quick retreat back to his world of clean lines and predictable outcomes. Mrs. Gable, the orphanage director, was a woman whose tired eyes had seen too much, but whose spirit refused to break. She walked him through the noisy, chaotic halls, pointing out leaky ceilings and cracked walls that his donation would fix. Julian remained detached, his mind on a pending merger, nodding politely but feeling nothing. Then he saw her. In a quiet corner of the common room, away from the rough-and-tumble play of the other children, a small girl sat alone at a rickety table. She was drawing on a scrap of paper with a tiny stub of a pencil, her brow furrowed in concentration. She wasn't crying or seeking attention. She was simply contained, a small, still point in a swirling world. "Who is that?" Julian asked, his voice lower than usual. Mrs. Gable's gaze softened. "That's Lily. She's been with us for 5 years, one of our quiet ones." Something about the girl's self-possession, her quiet dignity in the face of such bleak surroundings, pierced Julian's armor. For the rest of the tour, his eyes kept drifting back to her. After he left, the image of the small, solitary girl stayed with him. He found himself thinking about her during board meetings, her serious little face superimposed over spreadsheets and profit margins. A week later, he returned to the orphanage, telling himself it was to review the construction plans. He brought a box of new art supplies, crayons, colored pencils, and thick pads of clean white paper. He found Lily in the same corner and placed the box on her table without a word. She looked up, her dark eyes wide with surprise, then at the treasure trove of colors. For the first time, a small hesitant smile touched her lips. He started visiting every week. Their interactions were brief and awkward. He would ask her what she was drawing, and she would whisper a one-word answer: a house, a tree, a cat. He learned that she had been found on the steps of a church as an infant, with no note, no clues to her identity. She had been in 3 foster homes, all of which had sent her back, citing her difficult and withdrawn nature. To Julian, she just seemed like a child who had learned that the safest way to navigate the world was to take up as little space as possible. He began to read to her, his voice a low rumble in the noisy common room. He brought classic stories of adventure and fantasy, worlds far away from the grim reality of the orphanage. She would listen, rapt, her drawing forgotten, her eyes fixed on his face. It was during one of these readings that she reached out and rested her small hand on his sleeve. A simple, trusting gesture that sent an unfamiliar warmth through him. It was then that the impossible thought first entered his mind. He discussed it with Arthur, who was stunned. "Julian, are you serious? Adopting a child is not like acquiring a subsidiary. It's a lifelong commitment." "I'm aware of that, Arthur," Julian had replied, his voice firm. "Get the paperwork started." The process was an invasive maze of interviews and background checks. Social workers picked through his life, questioning his motives, his sterile home, his non-existent personal life. They saw a wealthy, eccentric bachelor playing a whim. But Mrs. Gable saw something else. "He's good for her," she told the skeptical social worker. "He's the first person who has seen Lily for who she is, not for what she lacks." Finally, after months of bureaucratic wrangling, it was approved. Julian stood in the judge's chambers, his hand resting on Lily's shoulder, and listened as a man in a black robe declared them a family. The finality of it was staggering. Now, standing in his bedroom, staring at the birthmark, that sense of finality had shattered into a million terrifying questions. Isabella. He hadn't allowed himself to think her name in years. She had been the one vibrant, chaotic, beautiful thing in his early life, a whirlwind of passion and dreams, when he was just a struggling entrepreneur with nothing to his name but ambition. They had been deeply in love, planning a future together. She had gotten pregnant. Then, one day, she was gone. A note was left on their small apartment's kitchen table. "I can't do this, Julian. I'm sorry." He had searched for her for months, his grief hardening into a bitter anger. He concluded she had left him, overwhelmed by the prospect of poverty and a baby, perhaps for a former, wealthier suitor her family had always preferred. He had thrown himself into his work, building his empire as a monument to his broken heart. He never loved again. And now this. A child, an orphan, with the same unique, secret mark Isabella had carried, a mark she had once laughingly called their own personal star. Coincidence? It was a word Julian Vance didn't believe in. The world was a machine of cause and effect, of actions and consequences. A star-shaped birthmark on an orphan girl adopted 15 years after the love of his life disappeared. That wasn't a coincidence. It was a ghost. Lily's small, frightened voice finally broke through his shock. "Did I do something wrong?" Julian looked down at her, really seeing her again. Her face was pale, her eyes shimmering with tears. He had terrified her. Guilt washed over him, sharp and immediate. He took a deep breath, forcing the storm in his mind to quiet. "No, sweetheart," he said, his voice hoarse. "You didn't do anything wrong at all. I was just surprised by something." He knelt down again, his movements slow, deliberate. He gently finished buttoning the blue wool dress. "There now," he said, forcing a smile. "You look beautiful." He knew, with a chilling certainty, that he couldn't let her see his turmoil. He couldn't let her know that her very existence had just upended his entire world. He had to protect her from the ghosts of his past, even as he knew he was about to spend every resource at his disposal to hunt them down. He had to find out who Lily was. He had to know the truth about the day Isabella disappeared. The silence in the mansion was no longer empty. It was filled with secrets, and Julian Vance would not rest until every single one of them was brought into the light. The days that followed were a master class in deception. To Lily, Julian presented a facade of calm, paternal care. He showed her the massive house, letting her choose her own room, a sun-drenched space overlooking the gardens that she immediately fell in love with. He filled it with toys she was too shy to play with, and books she was too intimidated to open. He hired a kindly housekeeper named Mrs. Davis, a warm, grandmotherly woman whose presence softened the hard edges of the mansion and, Julian hoped, would make Lily feel more at home. But inside, Julian was a man possessed. His first call was to Ben Miller, a private investigator who was more bulldog than man. Miller was a former detective, pushed out of the force for his refusal to bow to political pressure, and he now ran a discreet agency that catered to the city's elite. He was expensive, thorough, and owed Julian a favor from a long-ago corporate espionage case. They met in Julian's stark, glass-walled office downtown. "I have a job for you, Ben," Julian said, forgoing any pleasantries. "It's personal." Miller leaned back in the leather chair, his cynical eyes taking in Julian's tense posture. Personal costs double. You know that. I don't care what it costs, Julian said, his voice flat. He slid a folder across the polished mahogany desk. It contained a photo of Lily and a simple one-page document. I want to know everything about this child. Her parents, where she came from, everything. Her name is Lily. She was adopted from St. Jude's. Miller picked up the photo. Cute kid. What's the catch? The official story is that she was a foundling, left at a church. I want to know if that's the truth. You think the orphanage lied to you? I think the story is incomplete, Julian said carefully. He couldn't bring himself to mention the birthmark. It felt too personal, too insane to speak aloud. Not yet. Start with the church, St. Michael's, on the west side. She was supposedly left there 7 years ago. Dig deep, Ben. I want every file, every record, every person who might have seen something. All right, Julian, but records that old. For a case with no leads, it's a long shot. Find something, Julian ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. While Miller began his methodical investigation, Julian tried to build a life with Lily. It was an awkward, clumsy dance. He didn't know how to talk to a child. He bought her a pony, but she was afraid of it. He installed a state-of-the-art swing set in the garden, but she preferred to sit on the grass and draw. Mrs. Davis was the bridge between them. She taught Julian that Lily didn't need grand gestures. She needed routine, patience, and the quiet security of knowing she wasn't going to be sent away. Lily slowly began to blossom. The haunted, watchful look in her eyes started to fade, replaced by a childlike curiosity. She loved the gardens, spending hours collecting leaves and flowers. She fell in love with the mansion's vast library, her initial intimidation giving way to wonder as she realized she could read any book she wanted. Julian would often find her curled up in a large armchair, a book open in her lap, lost in another world. His feelings for her were a confusing tangle of emotions. A fierce, protective instinct was growing, a genuine affection for this quiet, thoughtful little girl. But it was poisoned by his obsession. He found himself secretly studying her, searching for traces of Isabella in the curve of her smile, the color of her eyes, the way she tilted her head when she was thinking. Every time his gaze fell on the back of her neck, where he knew the tiny star was hidden beneath her hair, his heart would lurch. This dual focus made his behavior erratic. One moment he would be distant, lost in thought. The next he would be overly attentive, bombarding her with questions about her day. Lily, with the keen sensitivity of a child who has learned to read the moods of adults for survival, felt his inconsistency. She began to grow quiet again, the fear creeping back into her eyes. She thought it was her fault. She wasn't being a good enough daughter. She wasn't what he had wanted. A week into the investigation, Miller called. "I've hit a wall, Julian, and it's a strange one." "What do you mean?" Julian demanded, pacing his office. "The church has no record of a baby being left there 7 years ago. The priest at the time, Father Michael, died a few years back. The current staff knows nothing. So I went to the city archives. The intake file for Lily at social services is thin, almost empty. It just says unidentified female infant, dropped off by St. Michael's Parish. No police report, no witness statements. It's like she just materialized." "That's impossible," Julian snapped. "It gets weirder," Miller said. I tried to pull the original birth records for unidentified infants from that time period. The entire year's records from the county hall were destroyed in a fire 6 years ago. Julian stopped pacing. A fire. Was it investigated? Ruled an accident. Faulty wiring in the basement archives. But the timing, it's a hell of a coincidence, isn't it? The conversation left Julian with a cold knot in his stomach. Sealed files. A convenient fire. This wasn't a simple case of a lost child. It was a cover-up. Someone had gone to great lengths to erase Lily's past. The knowledge was terrifying, but it was also validating. His instincts had been right. This was more than a coincidence. His obsession deepened. He started having nightmares, fragmented images of Isabella, her face filled with a sorrow he didn't understand. He would wake up in a cold sweat, the silence of the mansion pressing in on him. During the day, his focus on Lily became more intense. He started asking her questions, trying to jog a memory that wasn't there. Do you remember anything at all before the orphanage, Lily? A song? A face? She would just shake her head, her lower lip trembling. I'm sorry, she'd whisper. I don't remember. Each denial felt like a small failure, and the distance between them grew. The breaking point came one evening in the library. Julian was trying to read a financial report, but his mind was elsewhere. Lily was on the floor, drawing. She had finally started using the expensive art supplies he'd bought her. She held up her picture for him to see. It was a drawing of a man with dark hair and a sad face, standing next to a small girl, with a bright yellow sun shining above them. It's you and me, she said quietly. Julian looked at the crude, childish drawing, and something inside him cracked. The sad man on the page was a reflection of what he had become. He was so lost in the ghost of the past that he was failing the living, breathing child right in front of him. He was hurting her, making her feel as insecure as she had in the orphanage. He put the report down and knelt on the floor beside her. I'm sorry, Lily, he said, his voice thick with a sudden rush of emotion. I'm sorry I've been so distant. It has nothing to do with you. It's me. I have some things from my past that I'm trying to figure out. But it's not your fault. None of it is. She looked at him, her dark eyes searching his face. Are you going to send me back? She asked, the question a tiny, fragile whisper. The question broke his heart. No, he said, pulling her into a hug, his arms wrapping around her small frame. Never. You're my daughter now. This is your home, forever. She buried her face in his shoulder, and for the first time, she hugged him back, her small arms clinging to him tightly. In that moment, holding her, Julian made a new promise to himself. He would not stop searching for the truth, but he would no longer let that search poison the present. He would be the father she deserved, no matter what secrets her past held. He would protect her, not just from the world, but from the shadows within himself. It was the hardest promise he had ever made. The shift in Julian's demeanor was palpable. He began to separate his obsession from his life with Lily. His time with her was now wholly devoted to her. He learned to listen, to be present. He discovered she had a wry sense of humor and a fascination with insects. They spent hours in the garden, a magnifying glass in hand, as she pointed out the intricate patterns on a ladybug's back. He learned that her favorite food was not the fancy cuisine his chef prepared, but a simple grilled cheese sandwich, which Mrs. Davis taught him how to make. The first one he made was burnt, and Lily's giggle, as she ate it anyway, was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. Meanwhile, Ben Miller, undeterred by the fire at the records office, started working the problem from a different angle. He began pulling hospital admission records for every Jane Doe within a 3-month window of Lily's estimated birth date. It was a tedious, soul-crushing task, sifting through tragedies and mysteries. After weeks of dead ends, he found something. A single entry from a small, now defunct clinic on the industrial side of town. A young woman admitted for childbirth, no identification, paid for in cash by an older, well-dressed man who signed the paperwork as her guardian. The woman left 2 days later. The baby was transferred to social services. Miller tracked down a nurse who had worked at the clinic. Her name was Maria Flores, a kind-faced woman now in her late 60s. Her memory of that time was hazy, a blur of long shifts and tired faces. But when Miller showed her a picture of a young Isabella that Julian had provided, something flickered in her eyes. "I remember her," Maria said slowly, her finger tracing Isabella's face. "She was so sad and so scared. She cried the whole time, not from the pain of the birth, from something else, something deeper." "Do you remember the man who was with her?" Miller asked, leaning forward. "He wasn't with her," Maria corrected. "He brought her in, paid the bill, and left. He came back when the baby was born. A severe-looking man, cold eyes. He looked at the baby like it was a problem to be dealt with." "Did she say anything? The mother?" Maria thought for a moment. She kept whispering a name. "Julian." She said, "Tell Julian I didn't run. Tell him they made me." The words hit Julian like a physical blow when Miller relayed them. They made me. It wasn't a choice. She hadn't abandoned him. She had been taken from him. The anger and bitterness he had carried for 15 years began to dissolve, replaced by a cold, rising rage. Who were they? The description of the guardian was vague, but one detail stuck out to Miller. Maria remembered the man wore a distinctive gold ring with a black onyx stone. It was a detail Julian recognized instantly. It was the ring worn by Alastair Cromwell, Isabella's father, a man who had despised Julian, seeing him as a penniless nobody, unworthy of his daughter. But Alastair had died 10 years ago, in a sailing accident. It was a dead end. Julian's investigation had unearthed another name, however, one that kept appearing in the periphery of his business dealings: Marcus Thorne. Thorne was a ruthless competitor, the head of a rival tech firm, who had made several aggressive, and ultimately failed, attempts to take over Vance Industries. Their rivalry was bitter and personal. Thorne had once been a suitor for Isabella's hand, the one her father had approved of. Julian had always assumed Thorne's animosity was purely professional. Now he wasn't so sure. He had Miller start digging into Thorne's connection to the Cromwell family. The connection was deep. Thorne's father and Alastair Cromwell had been business partners. After Alastair's death, Thorne had absorbed what was left of the Cromwell family assets, a move that had solidified his own company's position. Just as Miller was starting to pull on that thread, something happened that brought the threat directly to Julian's door. A formal legal challenge was filed against Lily's adoption. It came from a previously unknown distant cousin of Lily's, who claimed to have just learned of her existence and wanted to take her in. The petition was filled with accusations suggesting Julian Vance, a single man with a demanding career, was an unfit parent. The legal challenge was being funded by a private trust, a trust managed by none other than Marcus Thorne. The move was as brilliant as it was vicious. Thorne wasn't attacking Julian's business. He was attacking his heart. He was using Lily as a pawn. "He knows," Julian said to Arthur, his knuckles white as he gripped the legal documents. "Somehow, he knows she's important to me." "Or he's just looking for leverage, Julian," Arthur cautioned. "A custody battle is messy. It creates bad press. He might be hoping you'll back off some business deal to make it go away." But Julian knew it was more than that. The timing was too precise. Thorne had made his move right when the investigation was getting close to the Cromwell family. The legal battle forced Julian to fight for Lily in a way he never had before. He was no longer just her guardian. He was her father, defending his right to love and protect her. The court-appointed psychologist who came to evaluate their home life found not a sterile mansion, but a home filled with Lily's drawings, taped to the fridge, and the sound of her laughter echoing in the halls. She found a father who knew his daughter's favorite color and the name of the character in her favorite book. Julian Vance, the corporate raider, became Julian Vance, the devoted father. He realized with a stunning clarity that it no longer mattered if Lily was Isabella's child. She was his child. He loved her fiercely for the quiet, resilient, funny little person she was. The realization freed him. His obsession with the past was replaced by a ferocious determination to protect their future. He would not let Thorne take her. He would not let anyone hurt her. Miller, meanwhile, had found the key. Following the money trail from Thorne's acquisition of the Cromwell assets, he found a series of payments to a private account in the Cayman Islands. An account belonging to a man who had been the lead investigator on the accidental fire at the county records office. It wasn't just a cover-up. It was a conspiracy. The final piece fell into place when Miller, acting on a hunch, revisited the now-abandoned clinic where Lily was born. The building was slated for demolition. In a dusty back office, tucked away inside a box of old employee files, he found it. A sealed envelope addressed to Julian Vance in Isabella's elegant handwriting. It had been given to Nurse Flores for safekeeping, with instructions to mail it if anything happened to her. But Isabella had disappeared, and the nurse, afraid of the cold-eyed guardian, had hidden it and tried to forget. Julian opened the letter with trembling hands. The words inside destroyed and rebuilt his world in the space of a few paragraphs. "My dearest Julian, if you are reading this, it means my father has succeeded. He found out I was pregnant. He was furious. He said you would ruin me, ruin our family name. He and Marcus Thorne. They have a plan. They are taking me away. They told me you agreed, that you took money to let me go. I know it's a lie, my love. I know it, but I am a prisoner. They are going to force me to give up our baby and marry Marcus. I will not let them. I will find a way to get back to you. Don't believe their lies, Julian. I love you. I will always love you. Wait for me. Our baby, if it's a girl, I want to name her Lily. And I know she will have our star, the one on my neck. It will be the sign. So you will always know she is ours. Forever yours, Isabella." The letter was dated 2 days before Lily was born. Julian sat in his office, the letter in his hand, as the setting sun cast long shadows across the city. The grief he had suppressed for 15 years washed over him, raw and overwhelming. But beneath the grief was a core of pure, unadulterated rage. They had stolen his life. They had stolen Isabella. They had stolen his daughter, and left her to languish in an orphanage for 7 years. He looked at the picture of Lily on his desk, her bright, smiling face. He had gotten her back, by some miracle, by some twist of fate. Now he would get justice for her mother. He picked up the phone and dialed Ben Miller. "I have what we need," Julian said, his voice deadly calm, "and I know exactly how we're going to use it." The reckoning for Marcus Thorne was coming. The annual Vanguard Tech Gala was the centerpiece of the city's social calendar, a glittering affair where industry titans preened for the cameras and made backroom deals under the guise of charity. This year, the keynote speaker and man of the hour was Marcus Thorne, whose company had just announced a record-breaking quarter. It was the perfect stage, Julian thought, for a public execution. Julian arrived late, a deliberate move to ensure all eyes were on him when he entered. He was not alone. At his side, holding his hand, was Lily. She wore a simple velvet dress, her dark hair tied back with a blue ribbon. She looked small and a little overwhelmed by the sea of strangers, but she held her head high, her trust in the man beside her absolute. Their entrance caused a stir. Julian Vance rarely attended such events, and never with a child. Whispers followed them as they made their way through the crowded ballroom. Thorne was holding court near the stage, a smug, triumphant look on his face. He saw Julian, and his expression tightened, his eyes flickering down to Lily with a flash of contempt. He had underestimated Vance, assuming the custody battle would be a simple matter of leverage. Instead, it had galvanized his rival. Julian navigated through the crowd, his path deliberate, his gaze locked on Thorne. He stopped directly in front of him, the ambient chatter of the room dying down as people sensed a confrontation. "Thorne," Julian said, his voice quiet but carrying in the sudden lull. "Congratulations on your success. It's amazing what a man can build on a foundation of lies." Thorne's face flushed. "I don't know what you're talking about, Vance. If you're here to make a scene, I'll have security escort you out." "I think your guests might be interested in the real story behind your rise to power," Julian continued, his voice as cold and sharp as glass. "The story of how you and Alistair Cromwell conspired to destroy a young woman's life." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. It was a high-quality copy of Isabella's letter. "This might refresh your memory." Thorne's eyes widened in shock as he recognized the handwriting. He made a move to snatch it, but Julian was quicker. "This is a letter from Isabella Cromwell," Julian announced, his voice rising to address the curious onlookers. "Written 15 years ago. It details a plan by her father and Marcus Thorne to kidnap her, force her to give up her baby, and coerce her into a marriage she did not want." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Thorne was speechless, his face a mask of panicked fury. "That baby," Julian said, placing a protective hand on Lily's shoulder, "was left on the steps of a church. She spent 7 years in an orphanage, believing she was unwanted." He looked down at Lily, his voice softening. "But she was never unwanted. She was loved, and she was stolen." He turned his gaze back to Thorne, and the full force of his rage was unleashed. "You and Alistair erased her past. You burned the county records to make sure she could never be found. You built your empire on the ashes of the Cromwell fortune, a fortune you acquired after Alistair's convenient sailing accident." At the back of the ballroom, 2 uniformed police officers, accompanied by Ben Miller, began to move quietly toward the stage. "These are insane, baseless accusations." Thorne finally found his voice, sputtering with indignation. "Are they?" Miller's gruff voice cut through the air. He held up a file. "We have the sworn testimony of a nurse who witnessed Alastair Cromwell leaving the infant at social services. We have financial records showing your payments to the arsonist who burned the county archives. And we have the original letter, which you and Alastair intercepted and believed was destroyed." Thorne looked from Miller to the approaching officers, his face ashen. He was trapped. The glittering edifice of his life was crumbling around him. "And as for the custody battle," Julian said, delivering the final, killing blow, "I wonder how the family court will view a petition funded by a man being investigated for kidnapping, conspiracy, and accessory to murder." He looked down at Lily, who was watching the scene unfold with wide, uncomprehending eyes. He knelt down so he was at her level, shielding her from the spectacle of Thorne's downfall. "It's okay, sweetheart," he whispered. "The bad man can't hurt us anymore." The flash of cameras erupted as the police escorted a stunned Marcus Thorne from the ballroom. The story would be on the front page of every newspaper by morning. The Vance-Thorne rivalry was over. Justice, 15 years delayed, had finally arrived. In the quiet aftermath, Julian and Lily left the gala, slipping out a side door, away from the prying eyes of the press. The drive back to the mansion was silent. Lily had fallen asleep in the back seat, her head pillowed on her coat. Julian watched her in the rearview mirror, his heart a tumultuous mix of grief, rage, and a profound, overwhelming love. He had won. He had destroyed the man who had ruined his life. But it was a hollow victory. It wouldn't bring Isabella back. He carried a sleeping Lily up to her room and tucked her into bed. As he brushed her hair from her forehead, his eyes fell on the wall where her drawings were taped. A house, a tree, a sad man, and a little girl under a bright yellow sun. He gently pulled the covers up to her chin and kissed her forehead. The mansion was still silent, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was the peaceful quiet of a home where a child was sleeping safely. The following weeks were a blur of legal proceedings and media frenzy. Thorne's empire collapsed under the weight of the scandal and the criminal investigation. Julian shielded Lily from all of it, creating a quiet bubble for them at the mansion. He finally told her the story of her mother, simplifying the painful details, but emphasizing the most important truth. Her name was Isabella, he said, showing Lily a framed photograph of a beautiful, smiling young woman. She loved you more than anything in the world. She was very brave, and she wanted you to be safe. He pointed to the birthmark on his own neck in the photo, a faint star identical to Lily's. "She called this our family star," he said, his voice thick, "so we could always find our way back to each other." Lily traced the face in the photograph with her small finger. "She's beautiful," she whispered. "She looks like me." "Yes," Julian said, his heart aching. "She does." He established the Isabella Foundation, a massive charitable organization dedicated to helping at-risk children and funding investigations into cold cases involving missing persons. He poured his wealth and his energy into it, turning his pain into a force for good. Life found a new, gentle rhythm. The mansion, once a monument to loneliness, was now filled with the sounds of a home. The clatter of Lily's roller skates in the long hallways, the off-key notes of her piano lessons, the sound of her laughter as she and Julian worked in the garden. One evening, Julian was tucking her into bed. She had a small mirror in her hand and was looking at the birthmark on her neck. "Papa," she said, "is Mama in heaven?" Julian sat on the edge of her bed. "Yes, I believe she is." "Is she a star now, like the ones in the sky?" Julian looked out the window at the glittering night sky. "Yes," he said softly, "I think she is. She's our star, watching over us." Lily smiled, a sleepy, contented smile. She put the mirror down and snuggled under the covers. "I love you, Papa." "I love you too, my little star," he whispered, kissing her forehead. He walked to the window and looked out at the vast, star-dusted darkness. For 15 years he had been lost, navigating by a map of anger and grief. But now, a 7-year-old girl with her mother's eyes and a tiny star-shaped birthmark had shown him the way home. The silence in his heart was finally filled, not with the echoes of what was lost, but with the beautiful, hopeful music of what had been found. The story of Julian and Lily is a powerful reminder that family is not always born of blood, but is forged in the heart. It shows us that even after the deepest loss, the human spirit has an incredible capacity to heal and to love again. A small act of kindness, a choice to open a closed-off heart, can set in motion a chain of events that leads to unimaginable truth and redemption. If this story of a father and daughter finding each other against all odds touched your heart, please show your support by hitting the like button and sharing it with someone who needs a reminder that miracles can happen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspirational stories that celebrate the enduring power of love and family. Thank you for watching.